Hello, everyone. Welcome to CXO Spice. CXO Spice is a platform for thought leaders to share their point of view on innovation and explain how to make it happen in the real world. I'm your host, Helen Yu, and today's topic is the data strategy imperative. Our special guest is John Picinich, Director of Product Management at Progress. Welcome to CXO Spice, John.
Thank you very much for having me today.
Great to have you here. Before we dive into our discussion, let's have you introduce yourself and your role at Progress.
Certainly. So I've been with Progress since 2019. We were actually an acquisition of a company called Ipswitch. I joined that company back in 2016. So I've been focusing specifically on file transfer product management for the last 10 years.
Wow, I'm so glad we have you here. That's a long history with the company. John, I work with many financial institutions today. They investing heavily in technology, yet most of them only have access to 20-25% of their customer data due to fragmented system. So when you combine that with urgent need for fraud prevention, cybersecurity, and some other new capabilities from through emerging technology, all of which the data, which are data dependent today, right? It's clear that we're at an inflection point. Let's unpack why modern data strategy have become so essential for financial institutions today. So my first question to you is, how can you secure automated file transfer solutions help financial institutions break down these data silos and solve the fragmentation challenge with scattered systems?
Sure. Well, as you mentioned, these financial institutions, they have to deal with a lot of different fragmented legacy systems. They've got their core banking systems, they have payment processors, they have loan originators, fraud tools, CRM tools. I mean, it's really a whole mix of different solutions. And each of those is producing these isolated data flows. And so where secure automated file transfer can be of benefit to them is it can act as a neutral integration layer that kind of ties those systems together. It enables data exchange between all of these disparate systems and doesn't require any invasive rewrites or, being able to or need to create expensive custom connectors between these systems. It really is more of an agnostic solution that allows them to glue these together.
Yeah, I concur, right? I've seen that firsthand as institutions work to consolidate and access more of that data. They're also under tremendous pressure to move faster, but speed without security is a recipe for disaster. So when customers want speed and efficiency, but security cannot be sacrificed, how do you help them strike that right balance and still deliver reliable, secure file transfer?
Sure. Well, definitely the demand for real-time data is increasing all the time. And, customers need to be able to move files faster. They need to perform fraud mitigation. They need to process payments and loan approvals and trading and customer onboarding. So all of these, are putting great pressure on them. But if you move fast without security, then you really build in systemic vulnerabilities that expose you to potential breaches and leaks and fines. And, each of these carry far greater cost than solving the problem correctly to begin with. And it's really a challenge to try and bolt security on as an afterthought. It really has to be built into the movement pipeline so that, you're having all of your data encrypted as it's flowing throughout the organization, having access controls, making sure that your keys are being rotated on a regular frequency. And at the end of the day, having centralized visibility so that you, incorporate things like least privileged workflows and having just great visibility on the data flow so that if there is ever, a potential, threat that is exposing your data, that you're seeing it and you can then react, very quickly.
Yeah, we are seeing institutions get better at securing their internal data movement today, right? But the landscape is changing rapidly with new regulations around open banking, data sharing. That adds another layer of complexity. So with all these new regulations, financial institutions are moving from old methods to API-based sharing, what role does secure file movement play in making sure organizations using these new methods effectively? I've heard this VPN or SFTP. Yeah.
Sure. Well, certainly we see that SFTP is far and away the most used protocol that our customers are using. And it really is because they need to interface between all of these various disparate systems. It could be mainframes, it could be, very old enterprise level applications that they're using. And then in turn, they're also utilizing cloud services from organizations like AWS and from Microsoft. And so they really have to try and glue together all these various disparate systems, and utilizing these standards-based protocols gives them the ability to create that bridge between legacy systems and API first architectures, and modernizing at a realistic pace. It'd be incredible if we all had unlimited budgets and unlimited resources to be able to do all this, in one fell swoop. But unfortunately, the reality is that they have to move at the pace that their ecosystem allows. And in many cases, that means that they have to have these kind of intermediate tools like managed file transfer to be able to glue those systems together.
Mhm. You raise a very important point, John. It sounds like having these secure data pathways in place, not only about compliance of current operations, but also about the future, right? What's coming next. And so what role does secure file movement play in ensuring organizations have the right data pathways to use technology like AI effectively?
Sure. What we see with a lot of our customers is, they're generally conservative by design. And so they have definite concerns about exposing their proprietary data to large language models. And so the approach that we've been taking, not only in the file transfer space, but Progress as a whole, is really adopting what we call responsible AI. So making sure that, one, we're not just implementing AI for the sake of AI, but we're doing so because it can solve real problems that customers have, and making sure that any exposure of any kind of proprietary data is done in a responsible method so that those customers can protect the information that, at the end of the day could damage their reputation if it was abused. And so the first areas that we're focusing on is areas within our own products that we believe we can make easier by incorporating AI technologies. So whether it's, making improvements to how customers create custom reports or doing threat detection, those are areas that don't need to necessarily expose or don't expose customer data. They're really just leveraging our internal data models and providing customers with the ability to free up time so that they can focus on incorporating AI into other areas of their business, like, for example, fraud detection in the banking industry is obviously a critical aspect that they need to continue to invest in. And so we want to make sure that we're freeing up their resources from a managed file transfer perspective so that those IT resources can be dedicated to other higher value tasks.
Hmm, that makes sense to me. I actually came across Highmark success story the other day. Can you share that a little bit more with us here?
Sure. So, yeah, they really, had a critical issue where they were just investing too much time in managing the flow of files, as part of their core banking processes. And so by incorporating our Move It portfolio into their workflows, they were able to really streamline and, focus more on a no-code type of implementation for automating the file transfer tasks, which then in turn allowed them to free up resources to embark on a multi-year fraud detection program that they have developed. And so it really is allowing them to focus on value added tasks, and be able to have the lights out kind of operations like file transfer being handled by a tool that's purpose built for that.
That's awesome, right? So the data foundation enables AI, but as these ecosystems expand with more partners, more data sources, more touch points, the compliance and security stakes just keeping getting higher. What role do secure system to system file transfer solutions like managed file transfer play in strengthening data protection, regulatory compliance across an ever-expanding ecosystem?
Sure. Well, as you mentioned, standards like PCI DSS are, obviously critical to our customers that are handling any kind of credit card transaction data. And one of the most recent changes that was made with the switch to PCI 4.0 was a requirement that all customers have a web application firewall in front of their critical business systems that have a web interface. And so we adopted that for our Move It Cloud offering, where we implemented a web application firewall in front of that so the customers would have that added protection. But, obviously we see more and more regulatory standards and requirements becoming more and more stringent. And so one of our critical, pieces of what we do is making sure that we're staying ahead of those requirements and incorporating them into our solutions so that customers can more easily adopt those security requirements without having to go out and procure different solutions from different vendors and have to deal with the integration between those solutions.
Well, that makes their life so much easier. Thanks for doing that. John, we've covered a lot of ground today: fragmentation, security, open banking, AI readiness, and compliance, right? For institutions listening who know they need to modernize but aren't sure where to begin. So, if you had to pick just one thing for those to get right, when they are setting up the secure file movement strategy, where would they start?
I think really probably the weakest link in what we see in most of our customers' environments is the human element. And
Mhm.
so I would suggest that focusing on having a centralized policy driven governance layer is really the most important thing that customers can do so that they implement, standards around consistent encryption methods, authentication, access control, and really, really have a good handle on what they're doing in that regard. Making sure that they can eliminate the fragmentation between systems that ultimately can lead to breaches and other, operational complexities that just make their lives that much more difficult. Once governance is standardized, it then allows them to layer automation and APIs and AI data feeds and analytics much more easily because they have a nice standardized framework to build on top of. And really, if you get governance right in the beginning, then everything else becomes more scalable and secure by default.
Yeah, I could not agree more with you, John. And this has been incredibly insightful. Here are three key takeaways from our conversation today. Number one is data fragmentation isn't just a technology problem anymore, it's a strategic barrier. When you only access 20-25% of your customer data, you can't deliver on efficiency, fraud protection, prevention, and other high impact initiatives. I love the fact you give example how you can help organizations to free up their time so they can focus on more uh, high impact initiatives. Number two is security and speed don't have to be trade-offs, right? With the right infrastructure like managed file transfer, you can move data effectively or efficiently while maintaining robust security and compliance, as we saw with real world example like Highmark. And lastly, is the foundation you build today really determines your readiness for tomorrow. And how you start, I love the example about how you need to standardize your governance framework. Once you have that standardized and built solid, everything else can be really taken care of from there. That's where successful transformation begins. Um, so, John, thank you so much for joining us on CXO Spice today and sharing your expertise on this critical topic. For our listeners who want to learn more about Progress, can they find you, or where should they go to find you and the Progress?
Progress.com is the corporate website, and they can reach out to me either on LinkedIn at my Progress email address at john.picinich, which is spelled Picinich at progress.com.
Awesome. Look forward to recommend that to other of my clients. And thank you everyone for joining us today. Stay hungry, stay bold, and stay grateful.